My name is Adrian Rangel. I am 41 years old. 2 years ago, I sat at the back of a condo meeting room in Concord, New Hampshire. My mother-in-law was seated near the front. She was reading a structural inspection report. That report had my company's letterhead across the top. Donna Ashcroft had spent 14 years on a single message to my wife. The message was that Camilla could have done better than me. Donna said it the week we got engaged. She said it at our rehearsal dinner, quietly, to a cousin. She thought I could not hear her over the band. She said a version of it 3 months before this meeting. She told Camilla our marriage would always be missing something. I would never really be family, she said. I never argued with her about any of it. I simply worked the way I always had. I built a small structural engineering firm one contract at a time. Then Donna's own retirement community called my firm. They needed a certified structural integrity inspection before refinancing a $14 million loan. The report that decided their fate carried my signature at the bottom. Let me take you back to how I became the son-in-law who was never good enough, and also the engineer nobody in that building could do without. I grew up in Manchester, New Hampshire. My father was Mexican and my mother was Guatemalan. They met working the overnight shift at a textile finishing plant. That plant closed for good the year I turned 9. Our neighborhood was a patchwork of working-class families. French-Canadian, Latin American, Southeast Asian, all of us packed into a few blocks. Those blocks sat in the shadow of old mill buildings that had once defined the city's economy. I grew up assuming the whole world looked roughly like our street. I was wrong about that. I did not discover how wrong until high school. I attended a magnet school across town in a wealthier part of the city. That school changed how I understood people. I saw, for the first time, how much weight a last name could carry. People measured worth by street address, by surname, by which side of the river you grew up on. I had never seen that kind of measuring done so openly before. I remember a classmate's mother asking me where my family was originally from. When I answered honestly, she said how interesting. She said it in a tone I would recognize years later. I heard that exact tone the first time Donna Ashcroft addressed me at dinner. Some prejudices wear the same clothing across every decade and every dining room. My father worked 6 days a week for most of my childhood. Sundays were reserved for church in the morning and blueprints in the afternoon. He spread rolled-up plans from job sites across our kitchen table at night. My mother made pupusas and tamales while he worked. She made whichever recipe she was missing most that week. I did not realize, as a kid, how unusual my father was. He was a framing foreman with no formal education. He could read structural drawings as fluently as any licensed engineer. He taught himself over decades on job sites. He corrected engineers' mistakes more than once. He knew when a detail did not match how weight actually moved through a real building. I think my entire career started as an attempt to formalize what my father already knew. I wanted the paper credentials that would let someone like him finally sign his name to the math, or someone like me. Instead of just building whatever someone else's stamp told us to build. My father, Reuben, found steady work on residential framing crews across the Merrimack Valley. My mother, Adela, cleaned offices downtown until her knees gave out in her 50s. We did not have much money growing up, but we had a house full of blueprints. My father taught me to read a floor plan before I could read a chapter book. I loved the logic of it from the very beginning. A building had to make sense on paper before it could make sense standing in the world. I decided, around age 12, that I wanted to be the person who checked whether buildings made sense, not just the person who built them. My father took me to job sites on Saturday mornings before the crew arrived. He showed me how a header beam distributed weight above a window opening. He showed me how a foundation crack could mean nothing or everything, depending on its direction and width. He never went to college himself. He used to say, half joking, that he had built half of Manchester. He was never once allowed to sign off on any of it. The state required a stamped engineering license for anything beyond framing. On those Saturday mornings, I decided I wanted to hold that stamp someday. The one whose signature meant something beyond the labor itself. My mother kept every one of my report cards in a plastic bin under her bed. She saved them from kindergarten onward. She used to tell people at church that her son was going to design buildings someday. She said it before I had any real evidence to support the claim. I did not understand, as a kid, how much that early confidence would end up mattering to me, especially in rooms where no one else offered it freely. I think about what it cost my father to never be allowed to sign off on his own work. He knew the math as well as anyone who held a stamp. He had simply never been given the chance to prove it on paper. That knowledge shaped the way I approached every inspection I ever wrote my name to. I was always aware that a signature is a form of trust, not just a legal requirement. Someone is relying on the person who signs the page. They need to know the work was done honestly and completely. My father never got to make that promise officially. I made it on his behalf every time I pressed my stamp into a page. I have held that license for over 12 years. I intend to keep making that promise. The stamp is not just a credential. It is the thing my father built toward for 30 years without ever quite reaching it. Carrying it for him has never once felt like a burden. It has always felt like the point. When I met Camilla, I had already spent 4 years at a mid-sized structural engineering firm in Manchester. I was cutting my teeth on residential additions and commercial retrofit projects. I was building the expertise that would eventually let me strike out on my own. I passed my professional engineering licensing exam on the first attempt. My father repeated that fact to nearly everyone he knew for about a year. He framed my stamped license certificate himself and hung it in his own living room. He said he wanted to look at it every day. I met Camilla Ashcroft the summer I turned 26 at a barbecue in Bedford. I remember being struck by how easy it was to talk to her. Some conversations do not require effort from either side. Camilla was a pediatric occupational therapist, warm and precise in equal measure. Within a year, we both understood we were building toward something permanent. Meeting her mother changed the temperature of the room almost immediately. Donna Ashcroft came from an old Concord family, the kind with a street named after a distant relative. A great-grandfather had once served on the state legislature. His portrait hung in the family's home in a frame. The first dinner took place at the family's lake house on Lake Sunapee. It was a large, shingled house that had belonged to the Ashcrofts for 3 generations. It was filled with tennis trophies and photographs of relatives I would never meet. Donna had spent all day preparing the meal. I remember thinking, naively, that the effort itself was a kind of welcome. I understand now that people can pour real effort into an evening. They can still decide, privately, exactly how much room to make for you afterward. She was polite to me at that first dinner. Politeness was functioning as a wall rather than a welcome. She asked what my parents did for work. When I told her, she said how industrious. The word sounded smaller in her mouth than it should have. Her husband, Camilla's father Warren, was a different kind of person entirely. He was a retired physical therapist with an easy laugh. He asked me genuine questions about structural engineering the first time we met. He told Camilla privately that I was exactly the kind of steady person their family needed more of. Camilla carried that comment like a small shield through every one of her mother's slights. I have often wondered whether Donna's coldness toward me sharpened after Warren died. His warmth had always been the thing standing between her disapproval and the rest of us. The week Camilla and I got engaged, Donna took her aside in the kitchen. She told Camilla she hoped she had thought carefully about the life she was choosing. Camilla told me about that conversation years later, long after we were married. At the time, she had been too embarrassed and too hurt to repeat it. I understood, hearing it finally, why certain holidays had always felt slightly cooler than they should have. Why Donna's compliments about our home always came wrapped in a small, careful comparison. Camilla's mother had raised her with a very particular vision of what the Ashcroft line should look like. It involved old Concord surnames and a certain kind of profession. It required a comfortable ease my own family's story did not carry. I did not understand any of this fully in the first year we dated. I mistook Donna's reserve for simple formality. Many parents start cold with a daughter's new boyfriend. They warm up eventually once they decide he is worth it. It took me embarrassingly long to realize that warming was never actually coming, regardless of how much time passed or how many holidays I attended. I want to be precise about the shape of Donna's disapproval because it never arrived as outright cruelty. Outright cruelty would have been easier to name. It would have been easier to leave behind. Instead, it arrived as a long, patient series of small comparisons and quiet exclusions, each one deniable on its own, each one unmistakable in accumulation. She introduced me to her book club friends more than once as Camilla's husband, never by name, as though my name were a detail not worth remembering. At Camilla's brother's wedding, 3 years into our relationship, Donna sat me at a table near the kitchen door. It was several tiers below where Camilla's cousins and their spouses were seated. Camilla's brother apologized for it privately afterward. He admitted their mother had drawn up the seating chart and refused any input. Camilla's brother, David, was kinder to me over the years than Donna ever managed to be. He told me once, over beers, that their mother had done something similar to his own wife. She had treated her the same way for the first 2 years of their marriage. She finally relented once grandchildren arrived and softened her in ways that adult reasoning never quite had. I filed that comment away for years. I did not fully believe it would ever apply to me. Donna's disapproval of me always felt rooted in something more specific than new-in-law caution, something closer to a verdict about my whole family's place in the world. David's experience, difficult as it was for his wife, eventually resolved itself the way most family situations do. Mine did not resolve until a $14 million loan and an aging concrete facade forced the issue. She kept a framed photograph on her mantle of Camilla with her late father. She never once added a photograph that included me. 9 years of holidays, birthdays, and family trips had not changed that. Camilla noticed it long before I ever said anything about it out loud. We built our own life carefully alongside all of this. We bought a modest colonial in Bow, just outside Concord, with a mortgage we could afford. Camilla insisted on planting a garden the first spring we owned it. Camilla's own career mattered enormously to both of us. She worked with children with developmental delays at a pediatric clinic in Concord. She built small, patient routines with kids who sometimes took months to trust a new therapist. She used to come home some nights, lit up over a single new word a nonverbal 4-year-old had finally attempted. We had 2 children of our own eventually, a son named Mateo and a daughter named Rosa. Camilla used to say that watching me explain load paths to our kids reminded her of her own father's patience. He had the same quality with his physical therapy patients. Donna never once made that comparison herself. The escalation moved through 3 distinct stages. Each one was a little more public than the last. Each one was a little harder to explain away as simple, old-fashioned reserve. The first stage came at our wedding itself, 6 years into knowing each other. During the mother of the bride toast, Donna spoke for nearly 10 minutes. She described Camilla's childhood, her father's legacy, and the Ashcroft family's long history in Concord. She closed with a line that landed harder than she likely intended. She said, "Camilla has always known her own mind, even when the world tried to convince her otherwise." Half the room laughed, assuming it was a gentle joke about independence. I understood exactly what she meant. So did Camilla, whose jaw tightened beside me at the head table. I did not say anything that night. It was our wedding, and I told myself it was one toast, one evening, easily survived. That was the first wrong. Dismissal delivered as a blessing. The second wrong came 4 years later, when Camilla's father passed away suddenly of a heart attack. The family gathered to settle his modest estate. Donna organized a private meeting with Camilla and her brother to discuss the details. She did not invite me. I had spent the prior 18 months helping manage her late husband's medical appointments and paperwork. I worked alongside Camilla almost every single week during that time. When Camilla asked why I had not been included, Donna told her that certain conversations belonged to blood family only. She hoped Camilla understood the distinction was not personal. It was, of course, entirely personal. I sat in the parking lot of Donna's house that afternoon while Camilla attended a meeting inside. That meeting was about her own father's memory. I had helped make that meeting possible in every practical sense that mattered. I was not permitted to enter. That was the second wrong. Exclusion delivered as tradition. In between the second and third wrongs, there was a smaller moment I still think about often. It never quite rose to the level of a formal wrong, but it has stayed with me regardless. Camilla and I hosted Thanksgiving at our own house the year after her father died. It was the first major holiday Donna had ever agreed to spend somewhere other than her own dining room. She arrived with a bottle of wine and a store-bought pie. She spent much of the meal complimenting the table setting while carefully avoiding any comment on the meal itself. Camilla and I had spent 2 full days preparing that meal together. Near the end of the night, Donna pulled Camilla aside in the kitchen. She asked, quietly, whether she ever missed how things used to be. The question was so vague and so loaded that Camilla did not fully process its cruelty until later. She repeated it to me hours after the fact, once the house was quiet again. I did not say anything about it directly to Donna. I simply noted it, the way I had learned to note most things by then, and kept moving forward. The third wrong came at Camilla's father's 1-year memorial gathering. It was held at Donna's house with nearly 40 relatives and old family friends in attendance. During a toast honoring her late husband's memory, Donna mentioned, unprompted, that she hoped Camilla would find a lasting partnership, the kind her father had modeled for her. Camilla had been married to me for 5 years already. The comment produced an awkward silence. A cousin laughed nervously to fill the space. Camilla's hand found mine under the table and gripped it hard enough to leave a mark. I smiled at the room the way I had learned to smile at Donna's version of our family. I had practiced that smile for nearly a decade. I said nothing. That was the third wrong. Erasure, delivered at a memorial, in front of everyone who had ever known the Ashcroft family. I did not confront Donna that night, or any night after it. Camilla wanted to badly, and I asked her not to, not because I thought Donna deserved protecting. I understood, by then, that direct confrontation would only give Donna a story to tell. The story of the son-in-law who caused a scene at her husband's memorial. I remember Camilla crying quietly in the passenger seat of the car that night. Not loudly, just a slow, steady leak of frustration she had been holding in front of relatives all evening. She asked me how I managed to stay so calm through all of it, year after year. I told her the truth. I had decided a long time ago that Donna's approval was a door I no longer needed opened for me. That decision had cost me something in the beginning, but had gotten easier with practice. The way most disciplined things do. Driving home that night in silence, I made a decision. I would keep building the life Donna had decided could never be good enough. And let the building speak for itself eventually, on its own schedule, whenever that schedule happened to arrive. For the better part of the following decade, I built a career almost entirely outside Donna's field of vision. I left the mid-sized firm where I had cut my teeth and started my own practice. I named it Granite State Structural Engineering. I started it with a business partner named Douglas Farrow. He was a semi-retired structural engineer who had mentored me since my second year out of college. Douglas had grown up poor in Berlin, New Hampshire. He worked his way through UNH on scholarships and night shifts. He used to tell me that the two of us understood something most of our competitors never had to learn. A building does not care whose name is on the deed. It only cares whether the math holds. He kept a small hand-lettered sign above his desk for as long as I knew him. It read simply, "The load does not lie." He had picked up that phrase from his own mentor decades earlier. He passed it down to me the same way. I adopted it for my own office years later. I think about it more broadly than just steel and concrete these days. Families have load paths too. Weight gets distributed unevenly across whoever happens to be standing in the right place to bear it. For years, in the Ashcroft family, that weight always settled on me. No one ever formally decided it should. Douglas co-signed our first business loan. No bank would extend credit to a 29-year-old with my last name and my zip code. He used his own retirement account as collateral. He never once asked me to pay him back faster than I could afford. When I finally did, years later, he took me to that same diner. We had drafted our first business plan on a napkin there. He told me the whole thing had been the best investment of his career. Douglas met Donna exactly once at a firm holiday party Camilla and I hosted. He told me afterward, quietly, in the kitchen, that he had met plenty of people like her. He had been in the trade for 40 years. People who mistook a quiet last name for a quiet mind. He said the trick was never to try to convince them otherwise. He said you simply kept doing the work well enough that eventually the math itself argued your case. In rooms where arguing out loud would only ever cost you standing. I did not fully believe him at the time. I believe him completely now. Our firm grew slowly and steadily. We specialized eventually in structural integrity assessments for aging multifamily buildings. It was a niche that became suddenly urgent across New England. Several high-profile building failures elsewhere in the country had forced states to pass new mandatory inspection laws. New Hampshire adopted its own version in 2019. It required condo associations with buildings over 30 years old to commission a structural integrity reserve study. The requirement was every 5 years. The study documented the building's structural condition and funded adequate reserves for necessary repairs. Granite State Structural Engineering became one of a small handful of firms in the state certified for these specific assessments. By the time I turned 38, I was overseeing nearly 30 such inspections a year across 3 counties. We were retained by associations ranging from small 6-unit buildings in Nashua to a 400-unit complex in Portsmouth. I testified twice before a state legislative committee reviewing amendments to the inspection law. I shared field data from our own case, files to argue for stronger minimum reserve funding requirements. None of that testimony ever made its way into a conversation with Donna. The small mentions our firm received in trade publications did not either. There were simply no conversations between us substantial enough to carry that kind of information. I remember the first time our firm's work appeared in a trade publication. It was a short mention, 3 sentences, about a balcony failure we had predicted before it became a collapse. No one was hurt. The association had taken our recommendation seriously and closed those balconies while awaiting repair. The story was less about us and more about why the new inspection laws mattered. But Douglas printed it out and taped it to the wall beside his sign. He said the load does not lie, and neither does the record. That combination, he told me, was the only professional reputation worth building. I took him at his word. I still do. I never once mentioned this part of my career to Donna in any detail. Camilla and I had long since stopped bringing up my work at family gatherings. I imagine other people in similarly lopsided families learn to do the same thing. They keep whole rooms of their lives closed off rather than watch them get quietly diminished at the dinner table. Donna knew, in the vaguest possible terms, that I was in construction. She used that phrase with the same careful smallness she once used for industrious. The trigger arrived almost exactly 2 years ago. It came as a routine bid request from a property management company in Merrimack County. The company oversaw several condominium associations and was taking bids on mandatory inspection work. One of the properties listed was Maple Crest Commons, a 55 Andover retirement community in Concord built in 1987. Under the new state law, it now needed its first mandatory structural integrity reserve study. The study was required before the association's board could finalize a $14 million refinance of a special assessment loan. The loan covered necessary facade and balcony repairs. I did not recognize the address immediately. Douglas was the one who mentioned, almost in passing, that Maple Crest sounded familiar. It was only when I pulled the property records that I saw Donna Ashcroft's unit listed among the current residents. She had sold the family house 4 years earlier and moved into Maple Crest after her health began to decline. Camilla had mentioned that to me once, briefly, months before I would have had any reason to remember it. Donna's decline had been gradual, a hip replacement that never fully healed. A slow retreat from the large lake house she could no longer safely manage alone. Camilla visited her twice a month, always without me. We had settled into that arrangement wordlessly years earlier. It was simpler than testing whether Donna's welcome had actually widened. I remember feeling a strange, unwanted pang of sympathy reading her name on that resident list. The woman who had spent a decade keeping me at arm's length was also an aging widow living alone, in a building that, as it turned out, needed serious help. I called Camilla from my truck in the parking lot outside the property management company's office. It was the day I first saw Donna's name on that resident roster. I had not yet accepted the contract or told anyone else at the firm. She was quiet on the phone for a long time, longer than felt comfortable. Then she asked me directly whether I thought I could actually do this fairly, given everything. I told her I did not know yet. I intended to find out properly through our firm's normal ethics process, not on instinct alone in a parking lot. She told me she trusted whatever I decided. She said she loved me for asking the questions seriously instead of assuming the answer. I want to be honest about the moment I understood what this actually meant. I did not feel triumphant. I felt mostly a strange and heavy responsibility. The awareness that whatever my firm found in that building would matter enormously to real people. My mother-in-law among them, regardless of any history between us. I discussed it at length with Douglas and with our firm's ethics counsel before accepting the contract. We agreed the appropriate path was full disclosure to the association's board of my family relationship to a resident. It would also involve structured peer review of any findings by a second certified engineer at our firm. The same protocol we would have used for any conflict of interest, regardless of who was involved. I spent the following 9 weeks personally overseeing the inspection alongside our senior field engineer, Teresa Kowalczyk. She was careful and exacting and had worked with our firm for 6 years. Teresa had come to structural engineering later in life, after a first career as a high school physics teacher. She brought a specific patience to field work that I had come to rely on for our most sensitive inspections. We coordinated closely with the property management company throughout the process. We scheduled access to individual units for interior inspection points. That meant I spent portions of 3 separate afternoons walking through hallways and common areas in that building. Donna herself likely passed through those same spaces daily. Our paths never once crossed during the survey itself. I made a point of that. I scheduled my own site visits deliberately around the building's posted activity calendar. I avoided the exercise class times and dining hall hours where residents tended to gather. Not out of any dramatic avoidance. I simply wanted to do the work cleanly. I did not want an early, informal hallway encounter before the board had any chance to hear the findings properly. We examined every load-bearing wall, every balcony connection point, every section of the building's aging concrete facade. We cross-referenced our findings against 37 years of maintenance records the association had fortunately kept in reasonably good order. What we found was serious, though not catastrophic. 12 of the building's 60 balconies showed corrosion in their steel support brackets significant enough to require immediate remediation. The building's western facade had water infiltration damage. It was extensive enough to threaten structural integrity within 5 to 7 years if left unaddressed. None of it was invented. None of it was exaggerated. Teresa and I spent long mornings on scaffolding lifts examining balcony connections inch by inch. We tested steel brackets with a handheld ultrasonic thickness gauge. We photographed every point of concern against a running inspection log that eventually ran to over 200 pages. On one particularly cold March morning, Teresa asked me, offhand, whether I had a personal connection to the property. We were hanging nearly 30 feet up against the building's western face. I had been unusually quiet all week. I told her the truth briefly. She was quiet for a moment before saying she was glad I had told her. It explained why I was being, in her words, even more careful than usual. The building already deserved careful treatment regardless. 37 years of New England winters, combined with years of deferred maintenance, had seen to that. The board meeting where our findings were formally presented was scheduled for a Thursday evening in the community's main clubhouse. Nearly 90 residents attended, far more than usual for what was normally a sparsely attended monthly meeting. Word had already spread that the inspection results would determine whether every unit owner faced a significant special assessment. The loan refinance was already under separate discussion. Donna sat near the front, 3 rows from the property manager's table for our presentation. She did not know, walking in that evening, that one of those engineers was her own son-in-law. I had driven past Maple Crest Commons hundreds of times over the years. I had never once stopped to look at it closely. Now I stood inside it, in front of nearly 90 people whose financial security depended on what I said next. I was also aware of something else, for the first time in any real way. This was the kind of room my father had spent his whole career being excluded from, not because he lacked the knowledge, but because he never held the credential that granted entry. I held it now. That awareness did not make me perform better. It simply reminded me of the weight of the thing I was holding. Douglas had offered to lead the presentation himself. He wanted to spare me the discomfort of standing in front of Donna in that setting. I told him I wanted to do it, plainly and professionally, the same way I would for any client. I stood at the front of that clubhouse and watched Donna's face as I was introduced by the property manager. I watched the exact moment she registered my name attached to the firm conducting the inspection of her own building. Her expression did not collapse immediately. It simply went very still. The particular stillness of someone recalculating a great deal of information at once. I presented the findings plainly, board by board, balcony by balcony. I used the same measured, factual tone I use for every client regardless of the stakes involved. I explained the corrosion findings on the balcony brackets, the facade infiltration timeline, and the specific remediation costs. Through the special assessment path, that meant approximately $34,000 per unit if the refinance fell through. I paused for a moment before that disclosure. I was aware it was the single sentence capable of changing how the room understood everything I had already said. I chose to say it anyway, plainly, without apology. Burying it would have been its own kind of dishonesty. I would not bring dishonesty into a room full of people relying on accurate information about their building. I disclosed, plainly and without prompting, that one of the building's residents was my mother-in-law. I explained that a second certified engineer at our firm had independently peer-reviewed our findings. That review was specifically because of the family relationship. I did not look at Donna more than professional courtesy required. I was reciting engineering findings. Findings do not need volume. They do not need permission from anyone in the room. The room stayed quiet for a long moment after my disclosure. It was the particular quiet of 90 people recalculating whether they had just watched something scandalous or something admirable. Donna's neighbor, an older woman who had lived beside her for 6 years, leaned over and whispered something. I could not hear it from the podium. Donna did not respond to whatever was said. She simply kept her eyes fixed on the folder in front of her. The same posture, I imagine, she had used at countless committee meetings and charity boards over the decades. The posture of someone determined not to let a room see exactly what she is feeling. A resident 2 rows behind Donna raised his hand. He asked whether the firm's findings could be trusted given the family connection I had just disclosed. I answered honestly. I explained our peer review protocol and offered to provide the board with contact information for the independent reviewing engineer. I also offered our firm's full inspection methodology for their own outside verification if they wished to commission one. The board chair, a retired attorney named Deborah Winship, thanked me for the disclosure. She noted, for the record, that our transparency exceeded what state law actually required. I watched Donna's shoulders drop slightly at that comment. The small, involuntary release of someone who had walked into a room expecting an entirely different kind of conversation. The vote itself took less than 15 minutes. It was a formality once the board had absorbed the actual substance of the report. The discussion leading up to it stretched across nearly 2 hours. Residents asked detailed questions about timeline and cost allocation. They asked whether the remediation work could be phased to avoid displacing anyone during construction. I answered every question as thoroughly as I could. Donna was hearing, for the first time in any real detail, exactly what my daily work involved. I was aware of that the entire time I stood at that podium. The board voted that same evening to approve the refinance path. They cited our firm's detailed remediation timeline as the deciding factor in securing favorable loan terms from the lender. The refinance ultimately saved individual unit owners an average of $19,000 compared to the special assessment alternative. The property manager mentioned that specifically to residents as they filed out of the clubhouse that night. Several residents stopped me on their way out to thank me directly. One older man gripped my hand for an extra moment. He said he had been dreading a special assessment on his fixed income. Our report had likely saved him from having to sell his unit entirely. I thought about how strange it was that the same findings could carry such different weight simultaneously. In Donna's world, they landed as a private reckoning. In dozens of other units, they landed as simple, welcome relief, proof that the truth rarely serves only one purpose at a time. Douglas found me in the clubhouse parking lot afterward. I was sitting in my truck with the engine off, staring at the steering wheel. He knocked on the window and got in the passenger seat without asking. We sat together for a few minutes in silence. He said he was proud of how I had handled it. Disclosure first, facts second, nothing personal allowed anywhere near the presentation. He said that was the whole trick, the one he had tried to teach me for 15 years. I had finally proven I had learned it in the one room that mattered most. Donna did not approach me after the meeting. She left quickly, through a side door, without speaking to anyone. She called Camilla 2 days later, not me directly. Camilla told me the conversation lasted almost 40 minutes. Most of it was Donna asking careful, roundabout questions about how long I had been doing this kind of work. Camilla answered plainly, without softening any of it for her mother's comfort. Camilla told me afterward that she had finally said something she had wanted to say for over a decade. She told Donna that Adrian had been managing the kind of responsibility Donna claimed to respect. He had been doing it his entire adult life. Donna had simply never once asked what it looked like up close. Camilla told me she had been surprised by her own voice on that call. It was steadier than she expected. Years of quiet frustration had finally found a clear, calm channel. It did not spill out messily the way she had always feared it might. She said Donna did not argue with any of it, which surprised her more than anything. Donna simply listened. For close to 10 full minutes, longer than Camilla could remember her mother listening to anyone in recent memory. It took the better part of a year for anything between Donna and me to shift into something resembling honesty. She invited us to dinner that following spring, alone, without other relatives present. It was the first time in 9 years of marriage she had done so. Over dinner, she asked me directly to explain what a structural integrity reserve study actually involved. I walked her through it plainly. The load calculations, the corrosion testing, the years of training required to hold the specific certification our firm carried. At one point, she asked whether the balcony corrosion we had found could have been prevented. She wanted to know what proper maintenance a decade earlier would have changed. I told her the honest answer. It likely could have been. Deferred maintenance was the single most common root cause behind every serious finding our firm ever documented. We had seen it across hundreds of buildings in 3 counties. She sat with that answer for a while, turning her coffee cup slowly on its saucer. I got the distinct sense she was thinking about more than just her building's balconies in that silence. Eventually, she said she owed me an apology she did not know how to fully deliver. She hoped I would accept a smaller, imperfect version of it instead of nothing at all. I told her I would. Near the end of dinner, she asked whether I would walk her through the Maple Crest report sometime. She wanted more detail. The board's summary letter had left her with questions she was too proud to ask her own neighbors. I spent an evening with her the following week doing exactly that. I spread photographs and diagrams across her small kitchen table. The unit was far more modest than the lake house she had once presided over. I noticed, watching her study the photographs, that she asked better questions than most clients I had worked with. More specific, more precise. I told her so. She looked almost startled by the compliment and then, quietly, pleased. I have thought often in the time since about what actually sat underneath Donna's years of quiet disapproval. I do not believe she disliked me personally, not really. I believe she was afraid in a way she likely could not have named even to herself. She feared her daughter's life would end up smaller or harder than the one she had imagined for her. That fear needed somewhere to live. It found a home in my last name, my parents' professions, the zip code I grew up in. Small, deniable proxies for a worry that was never actually about me at all. I learned, years later from David, that Donna's own father had lost the family's original textile business in the 1970s. A partnership with the wrong investor had taken it. It was a collapse Donna had watched up close as a teenager. It reportedly took her family nearly 2 decades to recover from socially and financially. I think Donna had built her entire adult identity around one thing after that. She would control exactly who got close enough to affect her family's standing again. I arrived looking to her like exactly the kind of unknown variable her father's story had taught her to fear. Understanding that fear does not erase the decade of small cuts it produced. It simply helped me stop needing an apology in order to keep moving forward. Our relationship with Donna now is careful, still developing, and genuinely warmer than it has ever been. She keeps a new photograph on her mantle, taken at her granddaughter's first birthday last spring. The 3 of us, Camilla, our daughter, and me, the first photograph in 9 years to include my face in her home. She has started calling before she visits, a small courtesy she never used to bother with. She brought a gift for Mateo's last birthday that she had clearly put real thought into. A small telescope. She had remembered correctly that he had mentioned wanting 1 month earlier at a dinner she attended. She had been paying attention. It is a small thing. I have learned over the years that small things are often the only evidence you get. Evidence that someone has genuinely started paying attention. I have decided that evidence is worth more to me now than a formal apology would be. She has not, to my knowledge, ever again told Camilla that our marriage is missing something. She asks actual questions about my work now. She listens to the answers now. She does not file them away as proof of a decision she made about me years ago. Looking back, I recognize small moments from years earlier that read differently to me now. I remember Donna once asking Camilla, offhand, whether my firm carried its own liability insurance. The question felt intrusive at the time. I now understand it was likely her own father's collapse speaking through her, decades later. She was still checking for the same kind of instability that had once cost her everything. I remember her asking, at a birthday dinner years before Maple Crest, how the condo inspection laws were affecting builders. I answered generically at the time. I never once suspected she was already paying more attention to my field than she let on. When I sit back and think about all of this now, here is what stands out to me most. Being dismissed quietly for years does not mean the thing being dismissed was ever actually small. I want to say this directly, for anyone listening who is currently living inside their own version of that dismissal. The absence of someone's belief in you is not evidence against your own competence. It is only evidence about the limits of what that person was willing or able to see at the time. I spent a decade watching Donna diminish a career I had built from nothing. Douglas believed in me before any bank would. None of that diminishment ever once changed what the work actually was. It only changed how safe it felt to talk about at her dinner table. Quiet competence eventually becomes its own form of evidence, even in rooms that spent years refusing to look at it directly. I built Granite State Structural Engineering one contract at a time. I never needed Donna's blessing to make any single one of those contracts real. The firm's growth did not depend on her opinion. Neither did my marriage, my children, or the quality of the work I did every day. I did that work for 9 years before she ever had a reason to encounter it directly. I think about how much energy I might have spent, over those years, trying to convince her sooner. How little that energy would have actually changed. Some doors only open on their own schedule, no matter how hard you knock. I think, too, about all the client conversations I had over those 9 years that Donna never knew about. Families who were terrified they could not afford the special assessment their aging building required. Older residents on fixed incomes who had poured their entire retirement into a single unit. That unit might now need more money than they had left to spend. I helped those people, too, in ways that never made it into any dinner conversation at the Ashcroft table. That work was real. It mattered, regardless of who was watching. A family's fear of the unfamiliar often disguises itself as concern for someone they love. Donna told herself, for years, that her disapproval was protective. A mother looking out for her daughter's future. I think it was closer to fear of her own daughter choosing a life Donna could not picture or control. I think about how often that disguise shows up in families. It wears the language of love while doing the work of exclusion. Professional transparency can do what a decade of quiet resentment never could. I did not walk into that clubhouse meeting to punish Donna. I walked in to do my job honestly, disclosing every conflict of interest before anyone asked me to. It was that honesty, not anger, that finally cracked something open between us. I think about that distinction often now. Younger engineers at our firm sometimes ask how to handle a difficult disclosure with a client. I tell them what Douglas once told me. Plain truth does more repair work in a room than any carefully worded apology. That has been true every time I have tested it. Patience is not the same thing as passivity. From the outside, they can look identical for years at a time. I never once raised my voice at Donna. I never once demanded she treat me differently. For a long time, I worried that made me weak in the exact way her silence implied. I understand now that I was simply choosing where to spend my energy. Building a firm and a family instead of fighting a battle that words alone were never going to win. Recognition that arrives out of necessity is still worth accepting, even when you wish it had arrived sooner. I would have preferred Donna ask me a real question at any one of dozens of dinners across 9 years. I would have preferred it before she was finally forced to. She did not. I have chosen to accept the version that actually came. Refusing it would only have cost me more of the years I have left with her. There is a particular exhaustion in being evaluated for years by someone who never once asked you a real question. I want to name that exhaustion plainly, because I do not think it gets discussed enough. It is not dramatic. It does not look like conflict from the outside. It looks like 100 small dinners where you learn to keep your accomplishments folded up small in your pocket, just in case bringing them out costs you more than it earns you. I carried that particular exhaustion for the better part of a decade. I did not fully recognize its weight until the night it finally lifted. I was sitting in my truck in a clubhouse parking lot with Douglas beside me. I felt lighter than I had in years without immediately understanding why. If you are the person your family has quietly decided is not enough, I hope you find what I found. Their verdict was never actually a fact about you. It was only ever a fact about how much of your life they had allowed themselves to actually see. I hope you keep building anyway, in the meantime. The way I kept building Granite State Structural Engineering long before Donna ever knew its name. Because the work itself was always the point, regardless of who was watching or when they finally decided to look. I think, too, about Matteo and Rosa and what they will eventually understand about the decade before they were born. The toasts and memorials and quiet exclusions that shaped their parents' marriage long before either of them existed. Rosa already asks, at 6 years old, what Daddy does at work. I tell her plainly that I check whether buildings are safe for the people living inside them. She accepts it with the confidence of a child who has never had to prove her father's worth to anyone. I hope she never learns to measure people the way Donna once measured me. I hope, if she ever does encounter someone who tries, she has her mother's steady patience. Camilla showed me that patience across all those difficult years, and the same quiet confidence her grandfather Reuben tried to instill in me. He tried on those Saturday mornings among the framing crews of Manchester. I do not plan to raise them on a story about grievance. I plan to raise them on a story about patience. About a father who kept showing up to a house that did not always want him there. And a mother who chose, every single time, to stand beside him instead of apologizing for him. I think that is the actual inheritance worth passing down. More than any certification or any hard-won apology from a mother-in-law who took a decade to truly look at me. Douglas retired officially last year, though he still stops by the office most Fridays. He told me recently that watching me build this firm was one of the best investments he ever made. He could not have imagined a better one, he said. I told him the feeling was entirely mutual, that I would not have survived the Ashcroft family's version of me long enough to prove otherwise without him. I think, finally, about Douglas's old sign one more time. The load does not lie. It never did, not in any building I inspected, and not in the slow, uneven weight of my marriage into a family that took a decade to make room. The weight was always real. It simply took the right room, the right report, and the right amount of patience. Everyone standing in that clubhouse could finally see exactly where the weight had been sitting the whole time. If this story meant something to you, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment and tell me about the Donna in your life, the one who took the longest to finally look at you clearly. Type certified if you know what it feels like to finally be seen for the work you were always doing. And if you are still waiting for your own version of that meeting, I hope it comes to you gently. I hope it arrives in a quiet dinner instead of a crowded room. I understand, better than most, that it does not always arrive on the terms we would have chosen for it.